Hello there, I'm Nathalia Melo, your unfiltered fit BFF. Mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who truly understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify your fitness journey so you can lose fat, regain your confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Come on, let's go. Hello there, fam. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. I'm Nathalia Melo, your host. And today we have part 2 of the incredible conversation that I had with Dr. Stephanie Estima, where we talk about everything women's health, women's fitness, hormonal health, and everything in between. I hope you enjoyed not only this episode, but the episode from last week. Cannot wait to hear what do you think. Make sure that you're leaving your review and that you share your thoughts with me either on the fan mail or via social media, which you can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed this episode as well. I have a question, and this is the mentality that I'm seeing a lot of women. It's kind of like, see, it's the hormones and, like 15, 20% is going to be my abdominal area. So that's it. And kind of like what you're saying there, like just accepting. My question is more, are there ways to mitigate such a aggressive transition? What would be the steps? Because people are always looking for the pill or the thing to blame, or the hormonal change is very real. We're not going to sit here and tell that they say that they don't exist. But what I'm finding is that acceptance, that's it. My hormones, I'm getting old. So how can you proactively mitigate such aggressive changes?
Well, you're not going to find me throwing up my hands in the air and saying like, well, that's my fate. Like, F that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll say that I think that there's a marriage here to be made with lifestyle and pharmacology, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you can't, and I'll state my bias. I'm a fan of hormone replacement therapy or menopausal hormone therapy as it's called now, but many people still call it HRT or hormone replacement therapy. Big fan of that. But I will say that hormone replacement therapy, even if you do start taking estrogen, like you have a uterus, so you're taking estrogen and progesterone together, that's not going to necessarily fix the body comp, right? Like that's just going to slow down the future fat deposition of more visceral fat, right? So if you have accumulated a certain amount of visceral fat, you got to do something about it. You can't medicate your way out of a problem that you behaved your way into.
Oh my goodness, this needs to be a quote. I'm going to make t-shirts with that and quote.
It's t-shirt worthy, isn't it? Yeah. So you can take medication, like you can take the hormone replacement therapy, and you also need to do the work. So you need to get into the gym. You need to understand who you are in the gym, what your limits are, physical and mental, because the whole name of the game with muscle is failure, right? And we already have a weird, peculiar relationship with the idea of failing. And that's one of the things that I love most about resistance training, other than all the physiological benefits we've been talking about. It really teaches me to change my relationship to failure insofar as like I chase it. And when we chase failure, not just in the gym, but in life, it's like fail forward fast, right? It's like the more you can fail, the more you're going to learn and the more you're going to progress.
I'm getting goosebumps because one thing that I always say is that the gym is a trial for life. A lot of the things that you're practicing in the gym, the resilience to keep on showing up, even when you're not seeing the results that you want, that is a reflection of life. You're not always going to get what you want, but you keep on showing up until you do get it. Like becoming comfortable with failure. It's a reflection of life, because everything in life, you're going to have to become comfortable with failing, because otherwise you're going to be stuck in mediocrity forever.
And I think the way, like, we are sort of in society, like, I don't know where it comes from, but this idea that failure is the worst thing ever. It's like, you would never take a newborn who can't talk to you. Idiot. Like, why can't you speak or walk or crawl? Or like, why can't you help me with the dishes? Like, we would never talk to a newborn baby like that. we talk to them. We're like, oh, sweetie, oh, you gave me a little smile. Like, oh, so we are so gentle and we give so much grace to babies, right? Because they're just learning and they're taking in like everything for the first time. Maybe we can think of ourselves as babies in the gym or in the weight room. You're trying to learn French, like whatever. You have to give yourself a little bit of that grace and love that you can very easily offer a baby or even a friend. Nathalia, if you were to come to me and say, gosh, I'm really struggling with this problem and I don't know how to figure it out, I wouldn't be like, you idiot. Why can't you, like, it's your first time dealing with this? Like, just figure it out. Like, why can't you figure what's wrong with you? I would never talk to you like that. I would be horrified if I said anything like that out loud. That voice is in our own heads, berating us day in and day out. It's like, why can't you just do the squat? Why can't you just blah, 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 blah? Like, does it pass the best friend test? Would you talk like this to your best friend or to a baby? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't be talking to yourself like that. And if you continue to talk to yourself like that, there's parts of you that have some unmet needs that you probably need to love upon that are trying to get your attention.
I think there is also a layer of shame associated with acknowledging that you don't know, especially with fitness. I think because the fitness industry as a whole is so under supervised and there is so much fuckery in it. And because there's so much information on social media, on all the things coming from all sides, it gives people.
And there's crazy social media like crazy people on social media talking out of their
backside
butts.
And so it gives people this sense of expertise because they are getting this bite-sized piece of information from social media without context. And it's like, oh, I should know what to do because I lost weight before. And people keep on beating themselves up. Like one of my hardest things when I'm speaking with somebody should get them to acknowledge that they don't know what they're doing. Yeah. It is wild to me. You have these people who are incredibly intelligent. They are able to acknowledge, I don't know everything about motherhood. I mean, there's plenty of information on social media, but I don't know everything. I'm winging it. I've been doing this for 8 years and
we're all winging it.
I have no idea what I'm doing. But, a lot of people have no problem saying this. But whenever it comes to fitness, because when they were in college, they were able to lose 25 pounds by starving themselves for a whole week. It's like that. It really is something that I've been noticing. So I have a question here because it's funny. We're always talking about what do you do now? It's an investment in your future. And it sounds so beautiful, like that quote that you put on social media. But I think that based on the conversation that we're having here, I don't think that we need any more proof that the actions that you take today or you don't take today, you're going to be paying for them in the very near future with your health. The collection of the interest is going to happen at some point. I think we were talking about the mobility or lack thereof if you're not doing this stuff now. And then we're also talking about the insulin resistance, that it is something that takes years and years to happen. And this is my idealistical self trying to see if somebody can answer this question for me. How can we help people understand that fitness and taking care of their nutrition and lifting weights and eating enough protein is not just a now thing, but the biggest piece of the puzzle is the tomorrow thing? How can we convey this message in a way that is going to get into people's head?
Yeah, I struggle with this question too. I have to be honest with you because the way that I liken fitness is kind of like investing, right? Financial investing. Yeah. If you are investing when let's say you're 20 years old and you put in a little bit, the compounding effect of that interest and the growth of that portfolio from, let's say 20 to 80, let's say, you have 60 years where that portfolio compounds. It doesn't matter how much money you put in. If you start investing when you're 50, you're just not going to be able to match the compounding and the growth that the 60-year portfolio has had, right? I explain it sometimes in that way, like there's a compounding effect that happens. When I was in practice, I'd have patients who'd come to me for like lots of chronic pain issues and headaches and low back pain and like movement issues. And it was like, which adjustment was the one that fixed you? It was like none of them in isolation, but it was like the compounding effect of all of them over the course of the last, 3 months that you've been under care here. So it's like, there's not just one that's going to fix it. It's the cumulative effect of those joints now being able to move properly and we're retraining the muscles that are attaching, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same here. It's like, which workout was the one that gave you the metabolic flexibility? None of them, but it's all of them over the past decade. that's one way that I like to explain it. The other thing that I like to talk about is recently at a medical conference that I was telling you about before we got going. And one of the questions that whenever I'm talking to colleagues, like, why do you talk about longevity? Why do you talk about health span? Inevitably, in some way, it always comes back to family. I want to walk my daughter down the aisle. But for me, I've already said it today, like I want to be indicted into the grandmother club. I don't want to play with my grandbabies and I want to be the favorite grandma, So it always usually comes back to, in some capacity, the things that are most important to us above like all currencies. Like it doesn't matter how much money you got in the bank, doesn't matter what car you drive, but you want to be healthy enough at the end of your life to be able to enjoy your family. It usually boils down to something like that. I want to walk my daughter down the aisle. I want to meet my grandkids. Like, I don't want to burden my family with Alzheimer's because I've seen like I had to take care of my parents who had Alzheimer's or my parents who had whatever disease that we saw how much that sucked the life out of our family and the toll that it took. I would encourage people to think of like your body now. Certainly you can love your body where you are now and have that inquiry and curiosity into what it might look like to be a little bit better. But also, why don't you think about your old lady body? Or like think about grandma body. So what does the grandma body look like? I still want to have biceps, like I want to have nice shoulder caps when I'm 90.
Oh, I want to be jacked. I love when my daughter's like, Mama, let me see your muscles. And I'm like, say no more. Got you, boo.
Yeah. Say no more.
I got it. Like, I want to be
jacked.
I want to be jacked.
I want to be the jacked granny.
Yeah. Like I love when I go, like, for example, I love yoga, obviously not replacing the weightlifting, but whenever I try, I know how to do all the tricks. I want to learn the cool tricks to show to my daughter so she can see that you can be strong and you can be a mom. So I have a question now, and this is going to come back a little bit more to the technical side of things, because you have everybody on social media talking about insulin resistance. And so can you explain to normal folks that if they see on social media somebody trying to bullshit their way into the whole insulin resistance, what is it, how it impacts fat loss, and how can you mitigate that when it can be a part of like the aging process, kind of like how we were talking about? So it's like, I know that is a very broad question, but I wanted to ask them all so you can incorporate into your answer. So what is it? What is insulin resistance? How it impacts fat loss, and how can you mitigate as you age the negative impacts of insulin resistance instead of, again, kind of like just being like, I'm old, insulin resistance, that's why I'm fat.
Yeah. First, I'll say that if anyone is talking to you in a grocery store, if you see someone pointing at kale or some green vegetable and they're like, this is what's killing you, like, run. Okay. So that's the first thing. Don't listen to anyone doing anything from a grocery store. Okay. So that's when we're talking about discerning information that we want to take from social media. So insulin resistance doesn't just come from sugar. Part of it's just a natural consequence of aging. And we learned in school that it's like the lock and key. Insulin is the key and it puts it in the lock of the cell membrane and it unlocks it. And then all of a sudden we can get glucose into the cell. So now the cell can create energy, ATP. What happens, of course, over time is when you have systemically, like in the body, there's too much insulin. Like anything, your body habituates to it. It gets used to it. So it doesn't respond in the same way. It's the same way that if like you heard this really great song, you're like, oh my God, I love this song. And then you listen to it 400 times. Well, the 400th time you listen to it, you're not going to have the same like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to hear this again, because like I've heard this now for 399 times before this one. Like I'm kind of sick of it. The same thing happens with our cells. Our cells kind of get sick of it, so they don't have the same response. So now the insulin is released from the pancreas. The pancreas has to have a higher output of insulin. It has to like jack up or crank up the amount of insulin in order to get the same amount of job done, to sort of clear out the amount of glucose from the bloodstream. And so actually, insulin resistance, if you sort of want to catch it early, you shouldn't just look at a fasting blood glucose on a lab, because some of the earlier stages of insulin resistance, you'll have absolutely normal levels of blood glucose. But what will be a little abnormal is your fasting insulin levels. Your insulin will be higher because your pancreas has to put out more of it in order to keep a euglycemic or normal blood glucose level. So as we get older, the cells don't respond in the same way to it. And that's actually why we see a little bit of carbohydrate restriction initially does actually help insulin sensitivity, because most people, when they get on some kind of formal diet, they are probably over consuming everything, including carbohydrates. So pulling back on that lever a little bit, gently and temporarily. I cannot say those two words enough. Gently and you will not stay in low carb land forever. But a therapeutic intervention of a low carb diet has actually been shown to temporarily improve insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the fat loss impact, so when we are now having large amounts of blood glucose that are not actually able to clear the system, they're not actually able to get out of the blood. Now we have this crisis of energy and crisis of inflammation. So now you can't actually get the glucose out of the blood into the cell to make energy. And so what ends up happening is now your liver has to work much harder, and you start to put out these other substrates into the blood that are trying to clear everything and try to get everything back to normal, which is now going to start affecting our lipids that we were talking about before, the total cholesterol, the triglycerides. And like the nerds that are listening, like if you want to look up like VLDLs, very low density lipoproteins, that's actually what we see when we are over consuming carbohydrates or we see too much blood glucose in the system. We tend to start outputting VLDLs to try and like clear everything up. And of course, when you don't have energy in the cell, you can't actually produce the energy that you need. And so the cell is essentially starving. And when cells are starving, what kind of signal does that send? You should eat some more food because I can't get the ATP in here. So the fat, what ends up happening in terms of like if CECO, like calories in, calories out, we end up over consuming calories because the cells are essentially starving. Even though we might have the substrate in the system, we just can't get it from the blood into the where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so ways that we mitigate that, I already mentioned like one temporary gentle intervention, which is lowering carbohydrates temporarily. And I say that because I feel somewhat responsible. Like I put out a lot of information on the ketogenic diet, and I still believe it to be a very wonderful intervention as a temporary measure for people who are metabolically unhealthy as we are trying to increase our insulin sensitivity. But what I did find over time was people were like, wow, this worked so well. I'm never going to get off of it. And so I would have people on this low carbohydrate diet literally for years and would develop this like food
aversion,
dysmorphia, like this aversion to carbohydrates, including vegetables and fruits. Think that we all should be eating every single day. And we're not even talking about the rice and the potatoes. Like just that was like devil food. Like it was like, might as well be the devil. And so I say this just after seeing, it always happens in women because women, God, I love women. And they always take things to the extreme because they're so hard on themselves.
Yeah.
And so you will never see a woman like, I was always like 2 menstrual cycles, 3 menstrual cycles maximum. That's where we want to be. And then I would have people that were on it for years. So I feel like it's my responsibility to sort of give that qualifier there. That's one way that we can mitigate it. Certainly exercise that we've been talking about for our conversation. When you're resistance training, we know that even just one bout, like just contracting the muscles. So you're doing squats or lunges or pull-ups, like whatever it is that you're doing, you're contracting the muscles and releasing. This is going to help dispose the excess blood glucose that's there. And then it helps bring the glucose into the cell to make the energy that you need. The cell's not starving anymore. And, you know, you have that satiety signal or that safety signal. So I would say that the 2 biggest ways that we can mitigate it is a temporary intervention of a lower carbohydrate diet. And then after that, we can sort of reintroduce foods back into play. Of course, there's bioindividuality there, as you know, but and then the other thing, I was just like wrapping it up with a bow, is like the other thing is resistance training. Like those are the 2 biggest ways that you can overcome the insulin resistance that sort of naturally sets in by having good quality tissue that's used to contracting several times a week.
And this is my bias because, again, the demographic that I work tends to have that very extreme mentality. And it's like only keto works or only low carb works. And they perpetually stay on that. Do you think that there is also a layer? Because whenever we say, oh, manage carb intake, but then they forget about the bigger picture, overall caloric intake. And then that works and has a better response. Like almost like they try to go from, oh, I'm eating for a family of 25. Oh, keto is going to solve all my problems. Instead of first try to meet somewhere in the middle with some caloric reduction. And then once we see some consistency with that, then maybe we move into a lower caloric intake just to mitigate the insulin resistance, and then have a way to taper back into a more long-term strategy with a more balanced diet. But basically my point is, do you think that going straight from, I'm eating from a family of 27,000 people in a starving family of Africa, into, it's keto. Keto is going to solve all my problems, because there's also the calorie management piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people, and this is part of what fasting is really. Like a couple of years ago, you would hear people saying like fasting is the solution for everything. And it's like, well, part of the reason why fasting works is it helps you restrict the total amount of calories that you can bring in. That's like kind of the main benefit that it has. Yeah. And so you can be on a keto diet and still be eating like a lot of junk food. Big Food sort of saw this big keto wave, and they're like, we're going to make keto cookies and keto chips and keto this. And it's like, you could still eat like a pretty crappy, very high calorie diet, and it still can be technically keto, and it's not necessarily good for you. So I think that your point is really well taken and well made, in that macro counting is just a subset of calorie counting, right? It's like when you're looking at your macros, you're actually also technically should be also looking at the caloric intake as well, because this is one of the fundamentals to fat loss. Is like, you need to, even though I know people hate it, it's like people don't like calories in, calories out. And I get that it is more complicated than just like calories in minus calories out. There's hormones, there's gender, there's all like fitness level, there's muscles, like all of the stuff that we've been talking about. But at the end of the day, there is a requirement for there to be less energy that you're bringing in than you are using.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because if you look at it, it's kind of like people think that hormones negate CICO, like calories in, calories out. Right. But I think where a lot of people are missing the boat is, you need to pay attention to your hormones, not to your calories. Well,
wrong.
Like
you need to pay attention to both.
Yeah. And like the hormones will impact how the in and out operates. Like, because for example, kind of like you're talking about the insulin, there is going to be your hunger hormones are going to be all over the shop, because so
the lowered estrogen
that is going to impact the calories in. And then if you have no energy in the cell, you're going to be lethargic, which by default is going to impact the calories out. So it doesn't negate. In fact, I think that it reinforces the importance of energy, calories in and calories out.
This is like the yes ands, right? It's like the hormones matter. Of course they matter. I talk a lot about hormones. Yes, they matter. Bioidenticals or hormone replacement therapy, menopause hormone therapy. Yes. And you also have to major in the majors, which is food and exercise. You cannot skip that. Your hormone replacement therapy is not going to fix your diet, and your hormone replacement therapy is not going to fix your lack of exercise. And so there's a really great quote, appropriately credited to Layne Norton. It's like, the results that you want is in the work that you're avoiding. That's how he says it. It's a bit of a pattern interrupt, because you're like, oh, how dare you? Yeah. I'm just like, oh, actually, no, he's right.
Yeah. No. And the things that I bumped into Layne in a lot of trips. I remember one particularly to Australia, and I was very bought into macros are like shit, like calories don't matter, like for a long time. And I started to learn and be open to change my mind. And I think that that's the beauty. Like, you've changed your mind. I've heard you say about intermittent fasting, about keto. And I think that that's the beauty of not branding yourself as the keto person, the vegan person, the XYZ person, because it kind of keeps you trapped in that idea.
And also, do you want to be going to a doctor who has not changed their mind in the last 20 years? That's a little scary. That means that they are so cognitively rigid that they're not open to new science and new information and or new interpretations of their currently held beliefs.
Yeah, no, 100%, which is funny, because another thing that I have kind of changing my mind a little bit about, but I think I see very eye to eye with you on that. It's kind of like with the hormone replacement therapy. I'm going to elaborate on my question here. Hormone replacement therapy. I speak with a lot of women. It's like, oh, it's my hormones, I can lose weight. And I'm like, okay, but what is it that you're doing? Well, I kind of try to go to the gym, but it's like not very consistent. And like, I try to be healthy, but it's so hard for me to stick with it. Damn. Like, how are we going to know what is truly the fault of the hormones without some level of consistency with the bare minimum, to trying to solve all these problems at the same time is like eating Oreos and brushing your teeth at the same time.
Right. How do I have all these cavities? I brush my teeth all the time.
Yeah. Like my husband yesterday, like last night, so funny. He was in bed with a gummy. Like he was a sleeping gummy, melatonin gummy, and he was about to go to bed, and it's like covered in sugar. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I already brushed my teeth. And I'm like, but you have a blob of sugar in your mouth.
Yeah.
So taking accountability of the things that you can do. And the thing that I changed my mind, I used to be absolutely against GLP-1, just that peptide, all the things.
Mounjaro, Ozempic.
Yeah, Ozempic, all the things. I'm being more open to it because I can see working with a demographic who are significantly obese. I can see how that is physiologically necessary. However, what I'm seeing is that there is a significant misuse of it and being prescribed, not as by everybody, but a lot of the people who are prescribing have very little understanding about nutrition. And they're like, oh, here, off you go, without any guidance with protein intake. That is my take. Yeah. How do you feel as a doctor, as someone who works with a lot of women as well, who are perimenopausal, menopausal, going into this new territory? What is your take?
I think that these GLP-1s, the Ozempic, the Mounjaro, the Zepbound, all the things, I think that they can be incredibly useful. It is much better to not be obese than to be obese.
Right.
And so I think that if you are someone who is obese, morbidly obese, you need to not be. And I think that these medications can really help with that through the appetite signaling and all the ways that they work on different centers of the brain. Where I think we begin to run into a little bit of issue is kind of where we started at the beginning of this conversation. Like, women and men are not the same. So when you have a pre-filled needle that's being prescribed for men and women, it's like you're going to have different effects on the body. And often the things that we see with like the muscle wasting and the Ozempic face or whatever it was called for a while, it's really a dosing and doctor management issue. Like they're on too high of a dose. I do think that it can be used in conjunction with HRT. It can be used in conjunction with lifestyle, but you can't have one without the other. Again, you can't medicate your way out of a problem that you behaved your way into. You can use medication to help you as a crutch to kind of get you going, because a lot of people who are on some of these drugs actually after a couple of months are all of a sudden like, you know what? I have way more energy. And like now I am really motivated to work out more and to eat better. And then they're wanting more counseling and they have more capacity to expand their skill set. So in that way, I actually think that it can be really great for people. I just think that you have to be working either with whoever it is that's working with the medication. Either they have to have a really good understanding of exercise physiology and how we can be muscle sparing and how we can increase our protein in our diet to help with that muscle loss effect that can happen if the dose is too high. I'm excited by it, but cautiously excited, because I think that there is, and we are already seeing this kind of in the celebrity world, like this potential for abuse. It's like people who just want to lose the 5 pounds to get on the red carpet or whatever. I think that there's a potential for abuse there. And I think you got to major in the majors. You got to major in the nutrition and in the weightlifting arena in order to preserve your muscle tissue, because you will lose it if the dose is too high or you're not being strategic about it.
Especially with the demographic that is being very aggressively targeted for that, which is the perimenopausal, menopausal demographic, which is already at a very high risk of that cannibalization of muscle mass and already come from a background of not eating enough protein and over exercising and focusing so much on the scale. And then you add that medication and it's like a bit of a recipe for disaster if used irresponsibly.
Completely agree. Yes.
Yeah, no, I love that. And to wrap up on this, there are a lot of professionals that I respect a lot. I'm not going to mention names, but I respect a lot of these professionals. But what I'm seeing is a lot of kind of like two schools of thought with GLP-1 this is just kind of like a jump start to a lifestyle change because it's bridging that gap between staying consistent for an extended period of time. And then there is also the school of this is potentially something that you're going to have to use for the end of your days.
I think both could be true. I'll say that you can use it as an intervention to get you started, and you might be on it for your whole life. The same with hormones. There's such a taboo I think from the Women's Health Initiative around women taking hormones, certainly even with men, like men taking TRT, it's like, oh, you don't have enough T. It's like, yeah, I don't. I'm 55. It's like, there's no problem in that. And there's some really interesting research. I mean, the next couple of years will be really interesting to sort of watch how it plays out, but there's some really cool regenerative properties that we're kind of seeing with these GLP-1s, like in brain matter, in heart tissue, in liver tissue. It's conferring a benefit. Let's say it's at a lower dose. Like maybe it's not at the standard dose in the pre sort of filled pens. Maybe you're like microdosing it, right? For lack of a better term. Why can't you stay on that? If it helps curb your appetite a little bit, kind of gets rid of that hedonic urge to like, and actually the other thing that I'm seeing clinically, like a lot of patients are saying that, hey, that online shopping problem that I never told you about? Well, it's gone.
Oh, managing addiction.
Yeah, it's so exactly. So there's at least some case studies, like clinicians are noticing that someone who maybe had a gambling problem, a porn problem, a tech, usage problem, like they're on their phone all the time, or like food, food is like the hardest addiction because it's like we have to deal with it all the time. Like that hedonic urge to like binge on the Oreos or binge on the cheesecake or whatever seems to actually go away. And they're seeing it in other verticals other than food, like some of these other addictions that a lot of people silently and sometimes not silently struggle with. So
interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to see where this pans out. So right now, I certainly think there's a dosing and management concern when women are on too high of a dose and you're not getting any protein and you're not mechanically stimulating the muscle. You can actually end up worse off metabolically than when you started. So that's really, really important that you're with a practitioner who really understands exercise and like all the things. Exercise, phys, kinesiology, nutrition, all that stuff.
And not deciding, I think, to pick between, because I'm doing this, I don't need help with my workouts and with my nutrition, because it's kind of like how we started the conversation. Just because you are on GLP-1, it doesn't necessarily mean, it actually means even more that you are going to need this support on this other side of things.
Right.
Because otherwise you're going to waste yourself away. Like the scale is going to be beautiful, but then what is going on the inside?
But what's the body comp? That's the question. Do we want to be the toffies, a thin on the outsides, fat on the insides? No. We want to be someone who looks good, who has curves, and the curves are either you were born with them or you built them in the gym. Right? And then you can also think about some of the pharmacology on the side as well that can augment that.
I love it. Stephanie, is there anything that you'd like to touch on as we start to wrap up? Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think that would be important to talk about?
I think if there's one thing I would like to say, we've been touching on it a little bit, but I'll just sort of crystallize it here, is that anyone who's listening, you're menopausal, you're perimenopausal, you're 35, you're 25, it is my firm belief and my philosophical premise that your body wants to be healthy. I always sometimes joke and I'm like, if you ever feel alone, just know that in your immune system, you have 1.9 trillion cells that are literally ready to die for you, like today.
Oh, I love that.
So it's like, if you ever feel alone, just know that you have this army of cells that are willing to fight for you and die for you, right? So having some reverence for your body and understanding that your body wants to be healthy. So if you're not experiencing the health that you want, whether that's a look or a feeling, because health can be both. Health can be how you look, but not always. It's actually health is more about being a feeling than it is necessarily like a certain aesthetic. If you're not there, it just means that we have to change the tools. We have to just change the inputs, and your body is infinitely more intelligent than you could ever imagine. And maybe she just needs a little bit of grace. You need to speak to her a little bit kinder. You need to love all the jiggly bits, all the wrinkly bits, all the bits, and then give her some better tools and just watch what happens. So I believe like that. I'm kind of describing this word is called salutogenesis, which is like a big fancy word, which just means your body has the ability to produce health. It's not default. It's not sickness.
I love the analogy of all the cells in your immune system. And we talked about this. I hate the word empowered. So, but we still haven't found a word that to replace that. But it feels very much like, oh, I can do this. You feel like a badass when you hear that.
Yeah, I got an army.
Yeah.
I got an army that wants this to happen. And I'm the general, and I got all my soldiers ready to take my orders.
I love that. Okay, I have a fun question that I ask. If you could go anywhere tomorrow on a vacation, on a trip, where would you go?
And jet lag wasn't an issue?
Yeah, no jet lag, flying first class so you could take a nap and all that thing.
Okay, I've always wanted to go to Seychelles.
Ooh.
Seychelles or the Maldives, because I just don't think I'll ever get there because I can't handle the time change. Like I go to Europe, no problem, but anything beyond that, I don't know. I would love to go to Seychelles. I've seen pictures of it. It looks like heaven on earth.
So you just do like a little stop in Europe, stay there for like a week, tour around, adjust your body, and then you go to the Maldives from there. And then it's like,
and what is it? What is the time change from the Maldives? Is it?
It's about an extra 6 hours from give and take from.
But
Europe.
You're flying south, right? You're flying south for 6 hours, but it's the same time zone.
Yeah, it's the same time zone. And I think that even, for example, if you go to Seychelles, and my husband would be disgusted because he is a geography major and he loves maps and all the things. But if I'm not mistaken, Seychelles would be roughly the same time zone as Europe because it's just directly underneath. There you go.
This script in my head this whole time that it's like, it's going to be like another 6 hours ahead and I'm not going to be able to handle it. But
we went to Japan and I was there for a week and it's a 16-hour difference flight.
Oh my
There were days that I was walking on the street and I couldn't go like more than 7 minutes away from my hotel because the tiredness, I literally just wanted to like take a nap on the sidewalk. So I had to go back to the hotel. It's brutal.
I hear great things about Japan.
Amazing.
People who've got like the food, sushi, people are so polite. Like it's just amazing. It's supposed to be as beautiful.
Tokyo is my favorite city in the planet, hands down.
Wow.
It's amazing. Highly recommend it. Doing little stops, like, can you get there, like just adjusting like 3 hours at a time. Then you do like a world tour.
I'm putting it in my desire list. I'm putting it on my desire list.
I love it. I love it. So Stephanie, where can people find you? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do now? You are incredibly smart. You have a phenomenal resume and experience, personal and professional. So where can people find you? What is it that you do now? Tell us a little bit more about you on that sense.
Thank you. I so appreciate that. Yeah. So for people who want to learn more, there's a couple different ways, right? So Instagram is probably a really great way to sort of see if I'm like a good fit with you. So Dr. Stephanie Estima. There, you can head over to drstephanieestima.com. And we have a newsletter there that we send out every week. It's called the Menopause, which is my like menopause, mini-pause.
Oh, I love
like
that.
A week. It's like a roundup of action items that you can do. It's for women, directed for women who are 40 plus. So those are kind of some free ways you can interact. The podcast is another way. Do a weekly podcast. You're a guest on that show as well.
That is amazing. I'll keep an eye. When do you think the book's going to be coming out? Or is it kind of like very early stages right now?
Yeah, it's still early stages right now. If I could guess, it would be out in 26.
All right. Awesome. We're going to put all the links in the show notes. But thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you being so gracious with your time and sharing all your expertise and knowledge. I'm sure that this is going to be one of our most listened podcasts because there is a lot of good information here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me here. And, I have to say, I love your spirit. I love your energy. I love what you're putting out into the world. And I admire you as well for all the accomplishments and the personal development that is very clear that has happened to you in your journey as well.
I appreciate that. And that's it, you guys. I hope you truly enjoyed this incredible conversation that I had with Dr. Stephanie Estima. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you're leaving that review. And I cannot wait to see you next week for next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on social media, Instagram. Links are down below as well. And let me know what topics you want to hear more about or who I should have on the show. This is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.